Welcome guys. In the video today, we're going to see the Andromeda creative testing roadmap and how I'm likely using it as a growth strategist, actively spending hundred thousands of dollars per month across different DTC brands and what I've seen working the best right now. The first thing is understanding what's really changed with Meta Andromeda. Meta used to be, and the creative testing used to be all about more volume of creative. Those more iterations that was also beneficial to get more basically to Meta, and more volume to Meta meant better performance overall, because the model before that, just so you have an idea, the model before that was basically they were using more of a logical sequence. So basically, if someone was a male 40 plus and they had an interest, for example, in running, they'll probably show some running shoes, for example. Now in theory, the system can actually compute a lot more ads, specifically 5,000 at one time, where previously it was probably around 50. Have more context to find the best customer there for our business. And really, the hypothesis now is behind a soulmate theory. So each ad is going to be tailored to a very specific person that is going to be interacting with a specific ad. And that's the theory behind Meta. So the model now, from the logical kind of sequence that they were using, the model now moves into more statistical model. Basically, now it will get all the context because it has a computing power basically, and it goes very, very in depth here, Meta, in terms of how exactly they are doing this practically. But essentially, now that they can compute a lot more data, it kind of gets all those stats. So time of day, the context of that specific person that is interacting with the Meta platforms, and the previous ads that has actually engaged with the content, everything, and it has a better idea on which ad can actually basically deliver to that specific person. And again, in theory, you're gonna tailor each ad, each message, each text even, to be very specific for that specific person, because it has a lot more context. So the model now moves into a more, let's say, statistical model and more probabilistic model. Before, it was basically deterministic, so very, very specific in that logical sequence. Basically, we have different ads here, and then it basically puts them into a hierarchical model, and then through that model, it basically spits out the exact ads that's going to be tailored to the specific kind of people as well. To put it very simply, the model now evolved from if this then that scenario. If, for example, someone matches this specific traits, we give him this specific ad, into a more best case kind of scenario. So in theory now, the person is going to be delivered more kind of contextual ads, more specific to their own kind of engagement within the platform as well. So it's a huge change. And what that means from an advertising perspective, we don't need more volume of ads now. We need more distinct volume of ads. So basically, different ads, and the more diversity that we're going to talk about in a bit on how we can actually unlock that, the better it's going to be delivering, because Meta will have a lot more context in terms of like which ads are going to be delivering to different kind of peoples, and obviously pushing us to net new audiences. And now actually Meta, and I'm going to make a very specific training video on that. If we end up into the scenario that we basically putting out more volume for the sake of it, Meta basically regards this volume as the same ad. So we may have like 10 ads that we think are different, or like different within the ad accounts, or multiple different ads, but they have the same ID. They live under the same ID for Meta, basically meaning it's going to be the same creative, which means again it's not going to deliver to new audiences. Going to the creative testing, what we mentioned now, what we need is more distinct volume, so more volume, but also having some intent with the volume, not just iterating very, very, very granularly, but more so bigger swings. A few things here to mention. Now, the most important thing in any creative testing scenario is hypothesis based testing, which basically means, and I say this all the time in different accounts that I audit, or just in general, the creative testing doesn't have specific hypothesis. There isn't some intent behind our testing. We are testing for the sake of it. We're testing because we got a new batch of ads that we want to test, but each test needs to stack up basically and give us a very concrete learning that we can then take into our creative feedback loop. In that way, obviously, make better better ads as we go along. Now, the main thing here, like I said, is set a clear assumption, which essentially is, let's say, for example, we say adding some social proof into specific ad, it will increase our click to purchase rate and thus conversion rate, or it will increase the click through rate. And that's a hypothesis here. There's a very specific assumption we need to make on an ad set level, or on a more, let's say, strategic level to then test within the ad account. Another hypothesis here, another kind of framework is you pick your benchmark ad. You should have a few ads obviously have moved the needle in the past or are moving the needle at the moment. So we need to choose those current best performing creative to start building from those. Obviously, is we still need to iterate even post Andromeda is how we want to iterate, how we can take this winning concept, and I'm going to have specific examples for that, into very similar messaging, or the exact same messaging rather, but on different, let's say, vehicle or like packaging. So let's say that we have a top performing static, how we can do this into a UGC, how can we do this into a high production video, how we can do this, for example, in a completely different environment, how we can do this in a within a completely different person or like persona. This is the next point here. Focus on specific variables. Again, you are gonna have, and we're gonna mention like 5 or 6 key things to test. But the most important things here will be like the opening line or the opening frame, the creator, the visuals, and the overall, let's say, structure of the video. If it is short, long, how that story is being communicated through the ad. And then another important framework here and principle of creative testing is going to be execute and then measure and document. It's so important that we start documenting as we start measuring those creative tests, because that's the way that, a few months in, we're going to have a backlog of exactly what has worked, not only from a creative perspective, but also from a concept slash angle perspective. And then we have much more confidence in our ability to produce, a lot more assets like that, basically. The last piece, one of the most important things now, is really push for that real variation. I know I've already mentioned this a few times. Each new variation should feel distinct, specifically on that hook, because Meta now basically reads the first 3 seconds of each ad, and if it sees similarity to previous ads, it just won't deliver to a net new audience, which again means for us less new customers, less obviously net new audience delivery, and obviously less new customers, probably high new customer CPA, and so on and so on. What it used to work in testing, it was again more volume of ads, probably have an ad, for example, and then we test, let's say, different headlines. So maybe test, for example, a a USB led headline, or maybe tested a social proof kind of headline. Or maybe test, for example, I don't know, a more formal kind of headline. So exact same creative, pretty much, with this different headline, and actually worked. And Meta, could actually deliver the ad and would actually give it impressions, and it used to work well. Now, what it used to, what it works now, is more distinct volume of ads, basically. And this is actually from Meta specifically, and I'll make a training video on based on what I've seen, and then from the training from Meta. As you can see, we are moving away from the similar message, same style, into a more differentiated message. So something like this here. So you can see is completely different style and different message. Now you could potentially do the same message, but for example package it differently. This could also work. And but the era that, just changing the headline here, having those very close iterations, is pretty much gone now. And how you can actually spot this very easily is spend breakdown reports, see where Meta actually delivers your ad, also from an age slash, demo perspective, but also from a placement perspective. If you see, for example, most of the spend is like pivoted into reels, for example, or into feeds, there's high probability that obviously either you are over indexing on statics or you're over indexing into videos. So we need to see how we can bring, for example, different formats. So that will probably mean net new audiences, different styles of ads to capture those net new audiences. And then one very easy tech here is like looking at your ads that are currently live. Are those very similar? Like, do they really look alike? This is a very easy spot. Obviously, you need to be a bit honest here. But if you see that, most of them are like problem solution UGCs or like very product oriented, let's say, videos, is how we can bring different styles. So maybe you see most of the stuff is within a studio, how we can bring, let's say, more lifestyle clips as well. And a brand that actually does this great is Fussy. Now, I'll take, I think that would be a great, obviously, example here, but again, you can really take this however you want in terms of like the different styles of ads. So basically, Fussy is a natural deodorant brand. Again, they have been featured in Dragon's Den, and they've used this PR, which is obviously a very strong angle to position your brand, and it has worked. And they did so many different styles of it that it just captures completely different segments, but it's still the same pretty much messaging that they got funded on Dragon's Den. Obviously they got some good feedback and everything. So as you can see, they have, for example, an article publication. Static probably will actually work mostly on those maybe slightly higher, maybe slightly older demos, because obviously it is like an article. Pretty much all the people are gonna be engaging with that. They also did, for example, a TikTok kind of style video with a green screen reacting to that Dragon's Den video. Again, much more younger demographic oriented. They also did, for example, another static, but or another publication, but it's different. As you can see here, it has the investor, it has basically a picture that is out there. It has, an actual printed banner here as well. Again, it's actually different. They did also a more high production static as well. More meta style, let's say. Again, it has Deborah here, who is one of the investors, I guess, which again probably has some publicity, again, depending on like the Dragon's Den and everything. They did a more, let's say, native format, just a photo that you probably see on your feeds. And they also did a podcast style. As you can see, completely different concepts here, but the exact same messaging. And this is how, one winning concept can actually drive hundreds of creatives, and only your creativity is going to be the bottleneck here. Now, into a more practical, as we're going to go into more specific creative testing frameworks inside the ad account and how we can structure this. First, we need to see what can you actually test and what's going to be moving most of the needle at the moment. Obviously, the first one will be around angles. So testing on specific angles, it might be, let's say, price, it might be specific pain points. And a really good thing that I've learned recently is, again, really focus on those more niche pain points, for example, or more niche, let's say, angles. So for example, if your product is, I don't know, a kind of hydration kind of supplement, or like a supplement for, let's say, running, and your pain point, or your main point is reduce fatigue after a kind of running session or like a marathon. You can even be even more niche. So for example, compact, let's say, compact deal with like leg cramps, how you can frame this as, this helps with like leg cramps, or it helps like pain in specific areas of your body, or it just overall help with restoring your muscles or whatever that is. Again, something that, for example, your core audience, it is one of those pain points, but it's not being addressed from an perspective, and that helps you really build that specific connection with your audience. So super important to this. Again, from an offer perspective, again, it's, it's some of the stuff that I think most brands just have a specific offer out there and they never like really question it. So for example, you might have an evergreen BOGO, you may test 50% off, for example. You may have, I don't know, a starter kit, you maybe test adding, a small gift with that, something like that. So you can test the offer, see if you can unlock, obviously, more contribution margin units, but also how you can be more appealing at scale. It's also something to test. Again, maybe not obviously that creative testing focus, but it is also very relevant to the creatives. And then one of the most important things is going to be format. Again, you're probably over indexing on some of that, either static or UGC, on native, on or more high production, for example. Is how we can get more of each one. Again, that will give us a balance across different age groups and different people who are going to be interacting with different stuff. And from a more granular perspective, let's say that you have a winner, or even if you don't have a winner, basically, but is how we can get this kind of creative diversity testing methodology going, basically. So you might say lifestyle. There's product demo. You might change product in hand based on a table or like on a desk. Might you might be testing UGC selfie style or maybe more polished commercial. I've also testing different backgrounds or demographics. This is how we can take one winning messaging and turn this into hundreds of variations or iterations. But as you can see, we're moving away from a very, very granular iteration. And that's my next point here is how we can build the real distinct ads. Again, conscious that we can't really spit out, we have one winning ad. We can't really just get a completely different persona in a day or so. So it's how we can get even more volume out of those winning ads. And the main thing to kind of trick is going to be that hook in the first 3 seconds. And when you go briefing your creators, for example, or your static designer, make sure you have these elements there. Is how we can obviously um, how we can basically get completely different visual initially. So you might be get the creator to shoot both in-house, but also outside of the house in a more, let's say, lifestyle setting. Or you might be also, testing those high production statics or like videos into obviously a studio, but also on like a desk or like a, again, more lifestyle setting, but it's still more high production. So the thing is, go for a noticeable visual contrast as we saw in the previous example above. Here, as you can see, again, we have completely different visual here in terms of like it's really gonna move the needle. And then don't just reuse, reimagine this. Again, bake variety into the brief, a lead with a new entry point. Again, this can also be the hook itself, might be a question, might be something else, and really think about it. And one thing that I've been very guilty of not really thinking is as you get into this process is like switch up who you are talking to and really bake that into the brief. So for example, really mention to the creator, this is the exact demo that we are going. Like really think who you're speaking to because obviously your core customer. Now we have everything that we need to from a kind of theory perspective. How you can obviously take all this theory, you created the ads, you created, different styles of ads, create different messagings. How we can put this into the account and what actually works from a creative testing perspective. Now, on those more lean budgets, let's say we have 15, 20K to test. Again, obviously it will kind of depend. I recommend basically two ways. The first one is obviously post Andromeda is having one ad set, putting most of the spend there and having those different styles of creatives into under that ad set. So you have, let's say, 10 to 15 ads under it, which I know sounds a lot, but things have actually changed. The key thing here is we have different stuff. So like UGC, statics, high production variations. This is one way because this basically allow us to have enough budget to make learnings, make statistical significant tests, and obviously progress in that way. The other way that I recommend we haven't put here is basically turn this obviously I wouldn't recommend going very, very low. So again, at least 5 to 6 ads under each ad set. And you can break this into a CBO. I always recommend ABO just because you have more control. But on those early stages, I like CBO as well because again, we don't have a lot of budget. We set the budget on a campaign level here, and obviously meta distribute spends where it sees the best results. It's a very similar scenario to like putting everything under one. The risk with the CBO is that we might not actually get out of learning phase in all of this all of the ad sets, which depend on where you are in terms of the kind of journey within spending, how much budget, how much sure your account is. We may actually want to be focusing on a or exit learning phase on each one of those. But either of those two work. Again, if you take it a bit from a bird's eye view, the things that we test are the same. Is more UGC, more high production variations, static variation, so we can get those new customers basically. Now let's say we have more budget. Okay, let's say that we are in the mid-high range. Again, this works, and I just want to show you the different methodologies here because this can be adjusted. It's not like that is said and done. So the most usual way that I like to test is using each ad set has one specific overarching messaging or like angle. So let's say that is price led. Let's say that it is targeting a very specific pain point. Let's say that is, for example, battling fatigue that we talk about. Let's say that it is running longer if it is the kind of previous example. Each ad set is going to have a specific concept. That's why we test on a concept angle level and see, what's really resonating, what's the learning that we can take into the next batches and the next kind of strategic, creative production. Same thing here from an ad perspective, 5 to 10 ads, 5 to 15 ads, I think is going to be the sweet spot. But again, just because we have the budget on each ad set, I'm more flexible as well. As you can see, I put here, let's say 3, but here I like more like 10. Here maybe being like another 10 to 15. Again, the importance here is on an ad set level. This is where we basically test. And another scenario of variation, I think this more high budget, I like to use ABO, like I said. This can also apply, and I put here mid-range mostly, but because it's a great way to, if you are that mid-range, so you have, let's say, $500 a day to spend on testing, you can get more learnings through that. But again, this really applies to both mid-range, so you can those two when you're dealing with budgets like above 30K a month, and you can really do this however you want to see. On the more mid-range, and specifically for those products that have distinct, I don't know what I'm saying here, distinct personas, basically what I was trying to say, or distinct kind of demographics, or like avatars. Great way to test the messaging on an ad level, and then on a persona level you test those two demographics. So let's say you have a beginner with more experience, or let's say you have, I don't know, a very, I don't know, fitness enthusiast compared to someone who's actually just starting out. You're gonna test these personas with the same framework, 10 to 15 ads under each ad set, and then you test the personas on an ad level. And then you test the personas on an ad set level. Awesome. We have the testing in methodology done. How do we then assess the metrics, and what are we taking a look at? Now, the first thing that I take a look at is obviously, assuming we have, a similar structure to what I just mentioned, we are going to get data, we have enough budget, and we set enough budget on an ad set level to get out of the learning phase. Again, based on that, you're looking at like 3 times all the way up to 5, 6, 8 times the AOV on the ad set level. So we get enough learnings and enough spent. Now, the thing that I take a look at and those early metrics to assess, obviously the most important thing here will be volume and ROAS, because this is going to be the half metrics. Are we hitting targets? Are we not hitting targets? And do we have enough conversions to make sure that we can make decisions? A great rule is here, which I haven't put here, is don't do anything below 72 hours. So basically 3 days, just let it rip, 3 to 4 days minimum, so you can get enough data and not be reactive. We don't want to be reactive. We want to get spent, and we want to get Meta to deliver ad basically. And now the things I'm taking a look at from a creative funnel perspective is the CPM and the outbound click-through rate. Are those healthy or in line with the account's average? Like if I have double the click-through rate, and not the click-through rate, the CPM, or for example, less than 0.7% click-through rate outbound, whereas my account is hovering around 1%. This is a bit alarming. This is something that it doesn't really resonating. So I want to optimize, and I want to see if this test doesn't really make sense after a point. The other thing is going to be frequency. If it's creeping above 2, pause it pretty much, because it means that we basically target the same people. Obviously, if it has decent performance from an efficient perspective, but maybe not from a new customer efficient perspective, you can still leave it. Obviously, it's still producing ROI, but it's still capturing the same people basically. And if it has 2 above frequency on early testing, that's not a good sign as well. But again, the main thing is this below or on target, and if the volume is there, what do we need to do? And here is a great visual. Put it. This is not mine, but this is great. And some of the frameworks here, obviously, I've taken from this. This is from the agency that we use and how we conduct test. This is a free resource that they are using as well. But basically, the main thing here is we need to be patient. We need to have minimum 10 conversions. We obviously allow for the learning phase for 7 to 14 days for optimization. We don't basically pause the ad set after 2 days. The algorithm will favor more creative options. So something that we talked about quite a bit today. Testing velocity. We are looking to launch 10 to 16 creatives weekly, depending on budget. Again, on the low end of the budget, probably looking at 10 to 20. The high end 60 plus to really fuel those scaling campaigns. Iteration speed, weekly creative refreshes for top performers, how we can iterate weekly on those top performers. and this is your metrics. Again, this is based what I just said before. If the conversions are like above 50 and ROAS is, above our target, we scale and promote. I both scale on that creative testing campaign vertically, but also horizontally on like another campaign that has a lot more budget. If, for example, the conversions are, reaching for getting out of the learning phase and ROAS is within target, I'm going to be promoting, but not scaling, obviously, that specific ad set because it's not that strong. Anything below, I'm going to monitor. Again, if the conversions are very poor and ROAS is like below 70%, I'm going to pause it straight away. There you have it. I hope you really enjoyed the video. Make sure to check the free resource below. I have specific trainings that I'm giving away for free, basically on like how to test, scale with the ad account, and more creative trainings as well. Again, feel free to get those below. And thanks a lot for watching this. I hope you really found it valuable. And yeah, you have a great day. Thanks a lot.